All right, how can one customer be worth $12,775 to you? Let's break it down with this example. So in this example, we have some variables that are consistent across the different scenarios. In all the scenarios, we have very similar metrics. So the AOV is set at $60. The visitors per day is 100. Cost of traffic is $100 a day. So $1 per click. The cost of goods is $15 per order. And what's changing between the scenarios is the number of people who are converting. So on the left side, far left side, we have 2% of people buying. In the middle, we have 3%. And on the far right, we have 4%. And so when it comes to the very first scenario where only 2% of people are buying, we actually end up being in the hole every day down about $10. And if we were to extrapolate this over an entire year, that's $36.50 that we're losing. In scenario 2, what's interesting is when we get one more person to buy, look at what happens. We can see that we're actually up $35 on a daily basis, and that backs out to $12,775 across the year if extrapolated. And where it gets even more interesting is if we get one more than that, so 4 people buying out of every 100 who visit your website, the numbers look even more favorable, where it's $29,200 extrapolated across the year off $80 a day of being ahead. So what's quite interesting is that if all we did in this business, assuming all the same constraints of $60 of AOV, COGS is $15 of that $60 AOV, and our ads are consistently at $1 per click, simply by adding one more person to buying takes us from being in the hole and unprofitable to being very profitable, and then even more profitable if we get even one more person beyond the 3 people. And I bring this up because oftentimes when we have a lot going on, it can feel like it's very overwhelming. And when we look at things from a perspective of what can I do to just add one more person to buy of every 100 that are going to my website, we can breathe a sigh of relief and just say, okay, let's just focus on this, or at least let's dedicate a portion of our time to focusing on this, to making sure that we're doing the best we can to improve that metric, which is ultimately your conversion rate. Because when it comes to being busy and growing your business, there's a lot of options. Like right now, there's a lot of things that are hot, like TikTok ads, Google ads, TikTok shop, getting on Amazon, native ads, getting into retail, podcast advertising, SEO. There's so many things that you can be doing, and there's so many things that a lot of people have a ton of success with. But we have to remember that these are all individual mountains to climb. You know, they're all just as challenging as trying to crack the thing that's right in front of you. And another thing to remember is that simply by doing these things and taking on these initiatives and opportunities doesn't guarantee success. There's still a lot of work that has to go into cracking the code for each of these opportunities and initiatives. And more importantly, they all have an initial startup cost to them, whether it's your time and sweat equity, or whether it's really actually putting aside inventory for it or putting actual dollars into the labor that's going to be required to make it work. So when we zoom out a little bit, what we can think about is, what can I do that's in front of me? If right now you're getting 500 visitors a day, 1,000 visitors a day, and you are converting at only 2%, what are you currently doing on a weekly or monthly basis to get that number from 2 to 2.5 or 2 to 3? Because as we go back over here, as we can see, simply going from 2 people buying out of every 100 to 3 people buying completely changes the trajectory of the business. And if you think about this at a larger scale and you add a 0 here, where instead of you're sending 100 people per day to your site, but instead you're sending 1,000, check out what happens. The impact is even more pronounced, where that extra person can yield an extra $127,000 a year in contribution margin, or $292,000. So when we're thinking about the things that we're working on a weekly and monthly basis, I think it's important for us to reflect and evaluate and make sure that we are continuing to maximize the opportunities that are in front of us. And a question that I like to ask is this one over here in this cloud, which is, do I have the systems in place on making progress on the outcome of getting just one more person to buy out of every 100 people that are coming in? Are we running experiments that will allow us to achieve this outcome? And the idea here isn't necessarily that it has to be an either or situation, right? We don't have to necessarily only focus on getting one more person to buy, although that could be a good use of your time. What's more so being expressed here is that we're just not neglecting this side of, are we putting in the effort and putting in the time and experiments to try to make that happen, so that every dollar we spend on advertising is being leveraged as far as it can go. So let's get a little tactical and let's talk about what it is that we can do and what levers we can pull in order to achieve this outcome of getting one more person to buy out of every 100 that are coming through your website. So if we look at the journey of customers or prospects on your website, we can think about it as going from an ad or some sort of source of traffic off of your website to a landing page, product page, or collection page, and then going down to adding to cart or going to a cart page, and then checking out, going to the checkout page, and then converting. And so in this example over here, we can walk through some numbers on what you might expect to see if you haven't spent a lot of time optimizing every lever that's a part of this journey. So from the ad to the website, we're seeing a 20% drop off where 100 people are clicking, but only 80 are actually making it onto the website. And you can actually see this change and see this delta inside of your ad account. If you add a metric to your columns called landing page views, you can actually see the difference between outbound clicks and landing page views. And here's actually an example of that, where within this ad account, we can see for this time range, we've had 51,000 landing page views out of 64,000 outbound clicks over here. So that's about 80% of people who click actually register as a landing page view. Then from landing on the landing page or product page or collection page, people add to cart, but there's also a drop off between those numbers as well. In this case, we have 5% of people who make it to the landing page, or rather make it to the website, actually adding to cart. And then from there, half of those people who add stuff to their cart end up making it to checkout. And then half of those people who make it to checkout actually end up converting. So in this scenario, of the 100 people that click an ad, we get one conversion at an AOV of $50, yields $50 in revenue. Now, for the second scenario, which I'll reveal over here, let's see what happens if we take some initiatives to try to get an extra person or two to convert by making incremental increases and improvements at different stages of the journeys that customers go through when they land on your website. So in this case, we've done things to tighten up the number of people who click to the number of people who register as a landing page viewer, number of people who click to the number of people who make it to your landing page or your website. And we've tightened that up to 90 people out of every 100 who are clicking. So the drop off is now only 10% as opposed to 20%. And then when it comes to add to carts, we've increased that from 5% to 10%. So 9 people end up adding stuff to cart. And then of the people who add stuff to cart, 55% of them are actually making it to checkout. So that ends up being 5. And then of the people who make it to checkout, 60% of those are actually converting and making their purchase, which ends up being 3 people. So in this scenario, we go from 1 person out of every 100 to 3 people. So we're adding 2. And assuming the same AOV and not even seeing any increases there, we see a tripling of revenue on that same volume of traffic that we've paid for. And the reason why it's interesting to look at it from this perspective is that we don't necessarily have to think about, we want to add one more person to buying. We don't have to do something monumental and do something that's earth-shattering and groundbreaking. What's available to all of us is to look at different touch points that customers have with us and see where we can make improvements. You don't necessarily need to throw away an entire ad campaign that you put a lot of time into or redesign your entire website. What you could do instead is look at every stage and touch point and think about what experiments can we run here in order to improve performance by 10%, 20%, 50%, 100%.